Hello, and thank you for joining me for today's presentation. I hope it finds you all healthy and safe. I wish I could share this with you all in person, but understandably, the organizers have taken every measure they can for our sakes. With that in mind, let's start the presentation. Today's presentation is about making the most out of a failed project. We will specifically talk about two mishaps that we experienced as a studio while trying to develop our own games and the lessons we learned from these experiences. We hope that you and your respective studios can use these lessons to grow and in the future make even better games. Before we begin, I'd like to take this moment to thank the producers, publishers, and developers who assisted me during my research. Their opinions, perspectives, and experiences played a critical part toward making this talk a reality. However, despite their considerable help, the very personal and at times sensitive nature of the topics discussed resulted in them requesting that they aren't mentioned by name in the presentation. So to all of you, thank you. You know who you are. So first I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Constantine Paradias, and I will be your host for the next hour. I am a writer by choice, having begun my career in writing fiction in 2010. I chiefly wrote horror and science fiction and was an active member of the Science Fiction Fantasy Writers of America. I've had more than 100 stories published across 5 languages, and one of them was even translated into Japanese. I am doing much better these days, however, thank you for asking. I've been writing for games since 2015, when I got an email meant for someone else, but that's a story for another time. My video game writing work has been featured in games like Vane, Raft, and Scrap Mechanic, among others. So today's talk isn't just going to be about failure. Sure, failure is what launched this ship in the first place, but I want to do more than just depress everybody. My purpose here is threefold. Primarily, I want to share some of the causes that result in projects failing, starting with the ones that affected our 2 original projects. Hopefully, that will help you diagnose what went wrong in your situation and save you further heartache. Secondly, I want to discuss what we learned in the aftermath of this failure and to recommend some ways out of the dead end that follows misfortune. I have also been in this situation, and I know that a lot of people often have trouble seeing past it. And finally, I want to go over what you can do to pull your team back together in the aftermath, because your people are your most valuable asset. As a final point, before we begin, I'd like to say that the opinions presented here are my own. They are based on my personal experience with the projects in question, my experience working on a number of other projects, and of course, by collating the opinions of publishers, developers, and producers in the industry. I have tried my best to reflect their own perspectives as widely as possible, so as many people as possible can hopefully be benefited from this. Any examples of companies used are simply there to help bring my points across and not to offend, criticize, or attack in any way. Excuse me. So, today we will be talking about a naturally occurring phenomenon in every creative industry that no one seems to want to discuss. And that topic is failure. A lot of projects fail to get any traction from the very early stages of pre-production. Some barely make it into production, and others still reach a ways into development before the publisher or the studio itself realize that it is no longer viable. Maybe the game simply can't achieve the scope it set out to do. Perhaps a mechanic that worked on paper can't be implemented, or maybe the end product is perfectly functional but simply not fun. Whatever the cause may be, it doesn't make it hurt any less for most of us. Projects don't just fail for lack of trying. More often than not, they will be developed by entire teams of talented people that will put their hearts and souls into them, only for them to never come to pass. I should know. I've been involved in more of them that I can really talk about in an hour, even if I hadn't signed all those NDAs. So, for the first leg of this talk, in order for me to illustrate the points I'm about to go over, I will use the examples of two games that we set out to make as our original IPs, how we broke our hearts failing to make them, and what we learned from the experience. Each game was developed at different points in the studio's history. Voices was among the first original games we tried to make, while Float came much later, when we had been more hardened and better prepared to deal with the aftermath of a failed project. While each experience impacted us in different ways, it also taught us most of these valuable lessons that I'm going to share with you today. So I want you to close your eyes and star wipe back to 2017. That was about the time I'd started working with Shapefarm as a freelancer, and I was invited to join a roundtable discussion with the rest of the team. They were looking for a few ideas that would be good enough to develop into a game. And while there were a lot of talented people involved and a ton of great concepts were thrown around, we didn't really know where to start. So I thought maybe Thomas, our CEO, could kickstart the discussion. So I asked him, what kind of game do you think we should make? And he said, well, we don't have a budget, an intended audience, any investors, any platforms, concept art, or mechanics yet, but Gamescom is like a few months away, so we really need to figure this out quickly. So we came up with Voices. It evolved over the next few discussions, combining our love of weird science fiction, the comics of Mebius and Alejandro Jodorowsky, and the books of the Strugatskys. We then sprinkled a whole lot of our own ideas. Of course, most of the stuff we pitched during those first few meetings just couldn't be made into a game. But after trimming out the impossible parts, we were left with a pretty good, apparently workable concept. This was the art that headlined our sales pitch for it. It made for such a great hook, in fact, that we even use it as a header for the studio's website today. And if we hadn't, I guess we'd have just started a prog rock band so we could just put it on the cover of an album. We were deeply passionate about Voices, and it really showed. Even those original design documents and the first pieces of concept art that we put together. This, of course, trickled down to our design team, who developed an idea as ambitious and impressive as the art. We were all caught up in a positive feedback loop, and things were looking really groovy. To give you an idea of how invested I was in the game, I wrote a 15,000-word document detailing the 1,000 years of lore leading up to the events of the game, going off just those concept images and the tagline alone. Of course, I also didn't check with anyone before I did this, which resulted in the following conversation. I think it's the best thing you ever wrote, and I love it, but we can't use it. Are you there? Skype shows that you read the message. I'll give you a minute. Some people say this is a tragedy, but I like to think of it as a valuable learning experience. For one, it taught me that writing for games shouldn't be left to the writers alone. So during pre-development, we worked hard on creating the science fantasy visuals of the world. We really wanted to develop an aesthetic that would stand out above all else. We also developed the world and a very early outline of the story, stakes involved, and the player's role in everything. Design did their absolute best with developing the first outline, the locations of the game, while also figuring out how to make the core gimmick stick. Things weren't quite there yet, but we were optimistic. We'd figure it out eventually. When we finally had enough that we believed could sell the game, we put together an excellent presentation, as well as a demo that showed off the core gameplay, along with an early trailer. Those did well enough and caught enough people's attention to fuel us to the next stage, so we rushed headlong to developing a prototype. Our intention had been to give a bird's eye view of the mechanics of the game, give the publishers one look at the entire package. We really gave that prototype our all, and I'm sure that the trailer will speak for itself.
place. Keep your eyes peeled for it.
Ah, found it.
Got it.
It's checking now. Oh, yeah. This is it, I think.
Yeah.
Great. On my count. 1, 2.
Wait, on 3 or on go this time?
On 3. 1, 2, 3.
Okay, it's opening.
Clear the room. Clear the room.
Make sure you check for traps this time. I'm gonna head up. Check the bar and see if there's anything worth getting.
Guys,
Not this, too much, not like this. He crushes me like death, like gravity. Look away. God, make me dead again.
Okay. What's... Okay, anybody else see that?
Is there anything else there?
I see something weird.
You mean the bot?
There's some sort of, I don't know,
Nobody ever checks the trap.
where'd she go?
Hold! I've got your back, don't worry. Packed it.
Keep it cool.
Can you hear me?
For the benefit of our interpreters, I will summarize the contents of the trailer. The trailer shows a team of Arconauts, which was the name we gave player characters, entering an area in an exclusion zone. Once there, the Arconauts have to work together to solve a puzzle that opens a door, leading them to encounter a ruined area with an abandoned robot. The robot then offers them an artifact while also begging for death. The player that chooses to interact with the artifact ends up being transported in another location by an invisible enemy, while the remaining Arconauts must face it. And when the enemy is finally defeated, the entire party are transferred to the next location. Our intention for the trailer had been to create the appearance of an in-game banter between the players, hence the chatter. So from the outside, it looked like everything was going according to plan. In fact, it even got us an offer from development from a publisher, which we eventually had to turn down. You see, what we discovered while working on the prototype was that while we could make voices look, sound, and feel awesome, we lacked a coherent sense of direction. We all worked toward a vision, but we didn't quite know how to communicate that vision to the entire team. It got so bad that after we were faced with going into production in earnest, almost every member of the team had a different understanding of what kind of game Voices was and how it was supposed to play. As a result, the experience that the prototype presented was different to the type of game that we had been imagining that we could make. The game that we had made had been extremely linear, with handcrafted events, and did not come close to the semi-linear experience that we had been pitching. To give you an example, based on games that have been released, we had pitched Prey Moon Crash, but ended up making Portal instead. It goes without saying, of course, that we could not realistically find a way to turn this into a 20-hour experience. When we realized these issues, we were forced to abandon the project. This was done for the sake of our team more than anything else. The game's concept and execution had, at that point, become too ambitious and vague to be viable. The fallout from Voices coming to pass hurt us considerably. We put in too much work and passion and capital into it, and it seemed as if we had gotten nothing for our trouble in return. It severely demoralized us, and for a while, it looked like we would never get out of that rut. It was the hardest lesson Shapefarm had to learn as a studio, but we had made the most of it by the time misfortune struck for a second time. The other game we tried to develop as our original IP was Float. I had pitched it to the rest of the team during that meeting in 2017 in its earliest form. The original take had inspired us, of course, but was a long way from having enough meat on its bones to be developed into an actual game. Float was originally supposed to be a Lovecraftian murder mystery taking place in 1950s America, set against the threat of an interspecies war. By the time we actually started developing the outline, we realized that absolutely everyone were making a Lovecraftian game at the time. So we decided that we needed a way to make it stand out from the crowd. According to a mystery reader, the original story was fun, but it's been done before. It needs just a few rewrites, only a handful. We should be done in a week. It took 3 years. But by then, we had almost completely reworked the Lovecraftian elements, shifted the world a decade and a half forward. We also relocated the story so it took place in Japan instead of the US. We trimmed down the factions that felt unnecessary, grounded the story a bit more in reality. They took out a good chunk of the bleakness so we could make a more emotionally engaging experience instead. As a fun aside, you can still read those early drafts of the old original on my website. They're unfortunately written in twine, but it was the best I could do back then to just make the very early prototype. But getting back to Float, while we all seemed to share the same understanding, our biggest hurdle was execution. So during the design phase, we tried a number of different iterations on the game, reimagining it with different play styles and structure. We changed the focus of the story to fit each iteration, adapting our creative direction accordingly. And all the while, we kept trimming what we could, making the core concept of the game carry across as best as we could. After 6 months of reworking the story, ideas, and world to fit a number of different takes on the gameplay and mechanics, we realized we didn't have enough there to develop into a prototype. Coming to terms with that was, of course, demoralizing. We had been a small team and put in the maximum amount of effort we could, only to realize that we couldn't figure out a way to make everything gel together. Ultimately, Float was put on hold. You could argue that perhaps we took the decision to pull the plug too early, but the signs were there that things were simply not working out, and pushing further would simply make everything turn critical. We told ourselves that we would revisit the idea sometime later, armed with a fresh perspective and a different approach. That's not to say that the process wasn't painful, but we rolled with the blow well enough that we could all keep going. It took us a long time to be able to tell the stories of what went wrong with these two games and realize what these experiences taught us. I originally thought that we were alone in our misfortune to make these games, and that this was just going to be a talk that focused on Shapefarm itself. But, as I said, a lot more projects fail to happen, a lot more people go through these hurdles, and the worst part is that no one wants to talk about it. It's this collective shame that the industry seems to carry on its shoulders when it shouldn't. There are precious few talks dealing with the fallout of a failed project, next to no resources to help developers escape the cycle of self-defeatism, and no articles to help you understand what went wrong outside of sensationalist postmortems. In hindsight, a lot of these mistakes, lessons learned, might seem very obvious, but that wasn't the case back when we had our development blinders on. But going through them and admitting to them was an essential part of our journey when it came to us growing as a studio. The first sin we committed was lacking a clear direction. You probably didn't notice when I was going over each of the stories of every game, but I never quite explained what genre of game either Float or Voices was. When we describe Voices, we would draw inspiration from first-person shooters and roguelikes and from the science fiction stories that inspired us to make it. When we would pitch Float, we would point at games we thought were similar to the narrative style we wanted to bring across, but we couldn't quite figure out how to turn them into coherent gameplay loops. In both cases, the elements we used were too disparate, and we had only factored them in based on coolness and what we personally found engaging and appealing, instead of approaching them from a design-first perspective. For both Voices and Float, while we had a vague understanding of what kind of experience we wanted to create, the specifics of the vision for each game were never successfully conveyed to the team. As a result, we weren't exactly sure what each game's core mechanics should be, how we should go about developing them, or even how they were supposed to play out. In the case of Voices, the core gimmicks of the game sounded very appealing in theory, but were confusing in practice. We could use snappy marketing style USP talk to pitch them to others, but we didn't quite know how the nuts and bolts aspect of them would work out at the time. By the time we began developing Float and saw the telltale signs of the same thing happening, we knew that the project had to be shelved. In short, what we lacked was a solid creative framework to build upon. Now, a creative framework doesn't just mean the rules that affect the aesthetic, the setting, the sound, and the feeling of the game, but also its gameplay and how it reflected to what we pitched to the publishers in the first place. We were good at establishing the first half, leaving enough space for our art, sound, narrative teams to flex their creative muscles, but didn't stretch as far as to encompass design, which resulted in the gameplay structure devolving into pure chaos. What also didn't help is that we had only the one game designer who was heroically juggling a dozen balls at once, trying to make all this happen. A good creative framework will help the game come together as well. You all obviously know this better than anyone, but a game isn't just the sum of its parts. It is the end result of a ton of smaller parts working together in harmony. Lacking this understanding can cause a team to not be on the same wavelength when putting a game together. And when each member of the team isn't on board with a core idea, it's time to either find a better, more effective way to communicate your vision or to rework it before it's too late. It all happens more often than you think. There are creative directors with a ton of experience and great ideas, as well as talented game designers that have proven themselves in a AAA game, and they will often come up with something that sounds amazing on paper. However, they might be unable to make their teams understand what the game is and how it's supposed to work. But structure is only the half of it. After all, a creative framework means nothing if the director does not have faith in their vision, and in turn, their team doesn't believe in it. If they constantly find themselves having to defend their decisions, second-guessing themselves against the team, then that means that the framework that they have does not inspire confidence and that their team isn't sold on it. And of course, a team that doesn't understand the core idea of the game will not be able to make it. So our second mistake for both games was that we were convinced that the passion which led to us to come up with these ideas in the first place would just carry us along through the entirety of development. As a result, we tried and failed to develop both games by the seat of our pants. This meant that we trusted the fact that our team was made up of highly talented and very experienced individuals, mistakenly believing that each one of our team members could simply sort out any issues that arose as they came up. We failed to see how our team would work as a whole toward making both games a reality, and we hoped that every problem would just have a magical single-source solution just waiting around the corner. All we needed, we thought, was one more great idea. Then another one, then another one, then another one, and so on. We honestly believed, while we were neck-deep into each project, that this hope-based method of development would just carry us along all the way to release, never once accounting for the very real possibility of burning out. The third lesson we learned was to innovate responsibly. Oftentimes, you might think you can just jury rig or imagine a creative way out of a shortcoming in your project, especially at the early stages. Maybe there's a particularly talented game designer in your team that can pull solutions out of their hat. Maybe you are that person. But most of the time, your new idea may create more issues than it solves. Reinventing the wheel plays a huge part in a project failing to gain traction, and even worse, it might confuse your team more and create unnecessary delays and complications. And while publishers are always looking for a game that has a special something to it that makes it stand out from the crowd, they're also reluctant to take in a game that is too original. After all, they might not know how it will fit into the current market and simply label it as too high risk before moving along. One solid example of innovating responsibly that I found was Supergiant Games, which are a studio that tend to innovate more than most studios in the category by inoculating themselves against the associated risks. They do this by gradually introducing new elements in each game they release. So their first game was Bastion, which was a two-dimensional action RPG with an isometric perspective and a heavy emphasis on narrative. Based on that, they were able to expand on it and develop Transistor. And then they moved into a completely different direction with Pyre, which was essentially football by way of Dungeons and Dragons. Finally, they developed Hades, which has been their studio's most successful game to date, which encompasses all the best parts of their previous games, but in a roguelike package. Using this strategy, Supergiant have been able to both make the games fun, build an audience, and maintain their publishers' trust in them. But if you do choose to innovate above all else, and you do create a viable game, well, first off, congratulations. We are very happy to see you succeed. Here are some points that can help your project survive being shopped to a publisher. First, make sure to keep your budget low. A brave new idea looks much better if it comes cheap. Secondly, keep your development outline feasible. Don't just wing it as you go along and hope it'll work out. And third, make sure your prototype is in working order because that's what's going to sell the game. Publishers are much more likely to accept and back your idea as long as your vision is one with relatively low risk. For our fourth mistake, we were simply unable to let go. This was a side effect of us trusting our passion and counting on the strength of the ideas themselves to carry us along. We simply pushed forward, counting on that feeling that had inspired us and inspired our trust in these ideas in the first place. This, of course, meant that the issues that kept piling up pretty much blindsided us when it all came crashing down. The problem, of course, had been that in both projects, we were working towards an ideal without ever stopping to consider how we were going to make it a reality. What we had hoped was going to happen in both cases was that both games were going to organically emerge from the core concepts and ideas that we kept iterating on. Instead of trusting our GDDs and focusing on the systems and the nitty-gritty that makes games into, well, games, we fixated on putting something, anything together. In the end, our teams were very unhappy with the way the games were turning out. In the case of Voices, most people, for example, wanted and thought we were making a shooter first with puzzle elements second, while the rest believed we were making primarily a puzzle game with action elements instead. That, of course, wasn't even counting everyone's individual interpretations of the gameplay. In the case of Float, we initially believed we were making a murder mystery game, then an adventure game, then an exploration-first experience similar to the game Journey. Of course, we could make none of those games in the end. From an outside perspective, this could be blamed on lacking design or on less than ideal mechanics or art rushing headlong to disaster, taking the rest of the project with them. But in truth, this wasn't just one department failing to notice the signs or a lead not pulling the plug before it was too late. We were all equally at fault. What we had been experiencing until then had been tunnel vision. This resulted from a heavy amount of personal investment, like others I encountered during my research for this talk. We became too entrenched in our doomed march toward trying to make the games happen that we couldn't acknowledge what we had just wasn't working out. This resulted into learning two harsh but very useful lessons. The first one, and the most difficult part of the process, was admitting that the ideas we had poured so much sweat and tears and love into just weren't viable. That was what kept us trapped in a sunken cost fallacy for the longest time, and what also keeps most developers from being able to move along and to also plan for the future. The second lesson we had to learn was how to detach ourselves from our games. That is, how to teach ourselves to approach each project with the understanding that failure was a very real eventuality, and to be ready to both do our absolute best while we're making it, but also to be able to emotionally and personally pull away from it when the worst came to pass. Actually, during my research, I came upon the case of one such studio, which, following a string of failed attempts to have their project picked up, finally received some useful, if harsh, feedback from a publisher, which came at the tail end of them spending years trying to make an otherwise unworkable project into a reality. Keep in mind that these people had been perfectly capable, and they were very experienced developers, but they had also become so consumed by the specific iteration of their idea, they had pushed themselves to the absolute edge while trying to make it happen. By realizing and admitting to themselves that the project was not workable, they were able to completely change the direction they were moving towards, shift their perspective, salvage the best parts of their project that wasn't working, and reinvent themselves as a company and a studio before they had to be dissolved. What they chose to do, and what we did as well, was instead identify the shortcomings of these failed projects, a strategy that many publishers and developers found that worked was to present their project pitch as much and as often as possible. That allowed them to get a large enough number of professional opinions to get a perfectly good indication of what was and wasn't working with their project. They always assumed that any lessons they learned, no matter how harsh, were a chance for them to learn how to fix the mistakes that they were failing to see. But as a personal note, always be ready to accept that it's not your ideas that aren't working, but just a specific iteration of them. Maybe the mix isn't right, or maybe some crucial element you aren't seeing is missing. That just means that your idea can still work. You just need to get the balance right. So don't kill your darlings, but be ready to let them go. There's something better waiting for you around the corner. If you would like to hear one of the most publicized examples of this exact approach happening in AAA gaming, you can take, for example, Blizzard's unreleased MMO, Titan. The game started as a very ambitious project that was developed, according to developers' words, by a dream team that worked hard across a number of iterations of the game, even going ahead with radical technological and direction changes while trying to make it into a viable product. Then President of Blizzard, Mike Morhaime, even admitted during an interview that there was a lot to be salvaged from the game at the time as the development process wound down. After years of dead ends during development, Blizzard's leadership were forced to abandon the project, which was a critical decision that allowed the company to repurpose all the assets and the best ideas from Titan into making their next big hit, Overwatch. So the fifth lesson that we learned during our ordeals was how to fail better, faster, and more efficiently than ever. When we began developing Voices, our first original project, we did so using an all-or-nothing approach, putting all our eggs in one basket and hoping that the game would be a big enough hit to get us settled for the long haul. When that didn't happen, of course, we were hurt deeply in the process. As a result, when we began designing Float, we did so using the minimal amount of people and resources, keeping our team small, and of course, the subsequent heartache mostly contained, minimizing the damage. Excuse me. So, in order for us to do this, we had to primarily learn how to run Shapefarm as a business first and as a vehicle for achieving our vision second. We had expected to create a masterpiece on our first go, which was extremely unrealistic. After Voices, we instead decided to come up with a long-term strategy that would help us keep our team together, ensure a long-term survival, and give us as many chances as we needed to keep making games until finally we got it right. I'd just like to make an aside here to mention that this is a point that I was told after having submitted the presentation that a lot of developers do not keep in mind according to publishers' perspectives. So for a second step toward teaching ourselves to fail better, we began to adopt a more clinical approach to our failures. We began to research post-mortems. We asked producers to interview team members regarding what caused the project to fail. This allowed us to identify what went wrong with every project and file it away for reference on our next attempt. In short, we tried to turn our shortcomings into lessons and to apply those lessons as best as we could. While this might all seem like a very obvious series of steps to take, it does not, in fact, seem to be standardized in the industry. Like I mentioned, publishers I spoke with told me that this is not the case across most of the studios they speak to. To use the nap baseball analogy that the same publisher gave me, you should not be able to hit a home run on your first time at the bat, but you should have a very good chance after the first few thousand. So possibly the most famous example of a company swinging until they hit an absolute legendary home run has to be From Software. Today, their design philosophy for the Dark Souls series has become almost an industry standard with regard to action RPGs, but the studio worked hard on producing games for decades before that happened across a wide range of genres to see what would work. Their strategy was obviously one that was based on keeping themselves afloat in order to continue iterating, finding the development philosophy and method of design that would work best for them, and learning from every mistake until they, of course, gave us Elden Ring 3 decades later. Though, in my opinion, they did touch greatness early on with Metal Wolf Chaos. For our sixth lesson, we had to learn how to pull through the burnout and disappointment of a failed project fast. Our takeaway was, to paraphrase Benjamin Franklin, that not planning for failure is a failure to plan. At first, I thought that lesson was extremely harsh. After all, not that many games end up not getting traction, right? Right? Before I move to the next slide, we will take a very brief break, and I'll let you guess the percentage of games that are pitched to publishers that ever get picked up. If you're on the chat, please feel free to post a number. Okay, that should be enough time for you to guess. Hope you didn't get your hopes up. Here's a number. 3%. That is an extremely small margin of games that are pitched and are ever signed on. Please keep in mind that this is a percentage of games based on the research I did and based on the publishers I spoke to. This percentage does not include paper pitches, which are impossible to sell to a publisher unless you have a proven studio. It also doesn't represent any games that fall short by way of quality, mechanics, or presentation, making them essentially lost causes. Every single one of the games in the 97% that didn't make it have nothing wrong with them. They have perfectly functional prototypes, they have a solid art direction, and a competent and passionate team behind them. Might simply lack a single element that would make them stand out. That's all it takes sometimes, by the way. A single thing not working as a whole. Preventing failure is next to impossible when the odds are stacked against you like that. But preparing for failure is the responsible thing to do, even if it is exceedingly difficult in some cases. It is so much it's so difficult, in fact, that a lot of studios simply choose not to. And what is worse, no clear process for setting up fail-safes seem to be standardized in the industry outside of the biggest AAA studios and companies. But of course, those are just too big to fail in the first place. I would like to take a moment to address in the chat. I saw some very interesting numbers. There were a few that were extremely optimistic, like a 30% and a 20%, but a lot of them were very close. I am very impressed. And also a quick shout out to the gentleman that posted, to the person that posted the 2%. That was extremely low, even by my standards. So what can you do to prepare for the worst? I've put together a list based on the wisdom I was able to gather by speaking to other professionals. And while it isn't foolproof, it should give you enough to help you come up with a better contingency plan. So first, set up a standard for whether a project is feasible. The idea is to have a set of rules that let your studio diagnose whether a project seems to be possible to be made early on, preferably as early as the design phase, and cancel it. This also allows a studio to see the warning signs of whether their team are driving themselves to the edge and lets them stop them before they reach the point of no return. Secondly, establish a plan B that will allow you to recuperate your losses. This could involve taking work for hire or even considering allowing equity investments to the studio. By also having a disaster budget for just such an eventuality is also a plus. In certain countries, studios can even be provided with cultural grants or support for R&D purposes, which are always a plus. And lastly, try to avoid stagnation. Have a project in the back burner that can be picked up as soon as the last one is canceled, even if it is about as insecure as the last one. By avoiding stagnation, you can maintain confidence in your studio's capabilities when it's time to approach a publisher once again. These strategies, of course, are made to help your studio stay afloat, and they cover the nitty-gritty of the financial side of things and the managerial side of things. But none of them care about the most important resource that I fail to see mentioned anywhere, and that is their people. So, the final and most important lesson that we had to learn was learning how to care for our people. This was a point I didn't really see brought up anywhere, in the few places that failure was even discussed. Salvaging your concept and your studio is important, but at the end of the day, it's your people that will make the games. And salvaging your people is more important than all the assets and big ideas you could ever hope to muster. So the first step to doing so is understanding that games aren't works of cold hard science. They are products of passion, and they are made by people who care, maybe a little too much in most cases, across all levels of their development. When they fail to happen, these same people will be hurt and often fail to find the point in pushing forward with the work ahead. What we learned as we struggled and failed to make our 2 games was that the well-being of our team was of the greatest importance to us. Our focus shifted from our products to them as we realized that keeping everyone together meant more for our long-term survival and for producing the best possible work we could ever hope to put out. So the first step to caring for your people is being willing and able to recognize when things are going sideways. The easiest way to achieve this is simply by being open to listening to your team. After all, they are the ones in the front lines, and their perspective can help you recognize when something is not working out and in the project and that you might not be able to see. By listening to them, you will be able to know when you should pull them back. More often than not, people will invest themselves mentally and emotionally into a project. They will drive themselves to the absolute limit, working on something that's not feasible, hoping that the next demo, the next iteration will just make it happen until, of course, they reach the breaking point. Being able to give them the support they need to disengage before they reach that point is absolutely critical and usually a good sign of a great leadership. After all, a good leader's job, as I was told, is not to be a perfect, infallible being that makes no mistakes or admits to no mistakes. It should be someone who's as willing to share responsibility and acknowledge their errors as much as everyone else in the team, and of course, willing to learn along the way. As a very interesting aside that I wanted to bring up, which I found shortly before making this presentation, so I'd like to apologize for not submitting this, was a very famous case of THQ Australia, which were assigned to create a Marvel game, and there was one famous case that was mentioned due to the burnout that happened, which failed to be noticed, where one of the producers got particularly violent because of the pressures they were going after and had to actually be escorted by police. You can look into this. It is a very interesting story about a game that didn't happen. So it's not smooth sailing at that point if you are able to pull your team back. Morale is always low after a failure, and building it back up can be a struggle in itself. Most studios, however, are not just production lines for games. Like we said, they are teams of dedicated people putting their all into the work that they are given. And besides simply asking your people to accept that all their work was for nothing, is the kind of mindset that breeds despair. And despair leads to fear, fear leads to anger, anger leads to blame. At that point, if you are a studio head, you will hear people complaining that maybe the project would have worked out if one department didn't drag their feet, or if someone else had flubbed the pitch. It's something natural, something that people in a vulnerable position tend to do. It's also a mistake that, if not corrected, could tear a team apart. An example I found during my research was, in fact, a case of the production team being blamed for the failure of a game that took place. This happened at a studio that I cannot reference by name, unfortunately. But it really hurt the production team, and it resulted, in fact, in them abandoning the company and eventually seeking employment elsewhere. Of course, by the time the problem was recognized and the mistake of the blame was acknowledged, it was already too late, and the team had abandoned the project and the company itself. So at that point, a studio head should be willing to do what they can to stop these disagreements and to control the damage. The best remedy to that, I found, is hope. So hope takes root in different ways depending on the people. Some may find solace in being given a chance to present their own perspective on what went wrong and what they feel could work next time around. Or your team might be eager to try something else. Giving them a chance to present and possibly develop their own ideas could do wonders to boost their morale. A team that loses hope is not a team that survives, like I mentioned with the production team before. More often than not, a failed project results in people no longer finding any meaning to continuing their work. These people usually tend to quit the team, or worse yet, stay on, but slide into apathy instead. And a team of apathetic people tend, to put it plainly, make worse games. There is no going back from that point. And that goes double for your leads, who are usually the ones to take the brunt of the pressure and the letdown. One cynical approach I actually got was literally about an approach that I was told that was pretty much, if you can afford it, you can simply replace the people who are disappointed. I do not think this is viable in the long run. So give your people time to vent, give them a chance to voice their complaints, try to get your best to keep them busy until they pull through, because they need it more than you think, and you need them more than you know. That was rough, wasn't it? Thank you for sticking with me. I think you've earned this. Our industry, our society, our cultures tend to fetishize success. We see failure as a point of shame, something we only want to go over during drinks, in a private setting, or just carry with us silently forever. If you're going to learn anything from this talk, please keep this in mind. Failure is the best way to learn when you're expected to innovate, and we're in the innovation business. As for the rest of the lessons we learned as a studio, here are some of the most crucial points. First, game development is a harsh mistress. Your idea, no matter how grand, means nothing if you can't play it. Secondly, never start a project without a viable game direction. Always be prepared to innovate and measure. Third, talent will sell your game, but a shared, coherent vision and foundation will make it happen. Admit that you will fail, and fail with a minimum amount of cost and pain to yourself and your team. Make a viable contingency plan, salvage the best parts, and keep moving. Keep an eye out for your team's morale. An apathetic developer makes bad games. Accept that you're only human, acknowledge that you did your best, pick up your pieces, try again. I know that the subject of failure isn't a happy, uplifting topic. I'm willing to bet that everyone has felt it to one degree or another, whether it's any of the people attending this live broadcast or those listening to this recording while folding their laundry, like you, hey you, this is a dedication. So for all its harsh truths, I am sure you're all willing to turn any bad turns into an opportunity for teaching. that you won't simply choose to let it weigh on your shoulders forever, that hopefully some of you will come up here to share your story and lessons and help us all make more amazing games. Before I leave you, I'd like to let you know that the concept art presented for Voices was created by Gabriele Palla of Studio Pomidori. They are a for-hire concept art studio, and I have used their work liberally because it's just that great. I can't recommend them enough. If you'd like to know more about their amazing work, please visit their website at pomidori.studio. Thank you for attending this presentation. I am looking forward to answering your questions. I'm afraid I can only answer questions written in English right now, but we will be having a follow-up Q&A session. We will address all the questions in Japanese. And if I don't get a chance to answer your concerns, or you just want to talk, please feel free to reach me at Constantine@shapefarm.net. Thank you. I am assuming, based on some of the answers I'm getting in the chat, thank you very much, about the more optimistic and more pessimistic perspectives on the games that do or do not get picked up. Maybe this is just surface level for me, but it feels like they're arranged by seniority. So I can sort of tell that, the more senior people are sprinkled out somewhere in the middle. People have been around longer, the veterans. I could be wrong, but I was more optimistic when I started. One question posted was, you mentioned about not having a clear genre as one of the pitfalls, but what would you say about trying to innovate through genre-defying games? I mentioned the genre because it is an easiest way for me to explain the type of game that it was. Genre-defining games are necessary in the industry. Having them is good. Having great innovation is good. But pitching and selling and making a genre-defying game will often result in having the odds stacked against you. Even so, it's still, even if you do this, even if you do make a genre-defining game, you still need a clear creative direction and a solid creative framework. You cannot just break new ground and not know what to do with it next. So, Jinuk, if I'm reading this correctly, do you have a specific process that determines if the project is feasible? Is it decided by a leader or the entire team? In the case of Shapefarm, it's both. Usually, one good telltale example is to set up a time limit, sort of. For example, you have this long to be out of the design phase, start working toward a prototype. If you cannot make this, this means that we need to look at this again and the project needs to be shelved. Usually it's team leads that will be able to see this first, but if the team leads get stuck with the development blinders as much as anybody else, then a lead is going to have to pull the plug. What do you think? We have reached the end of the session, but we will keep the questions and we will go into the Q&A. So thank you very much. I will see you soon. Thank you for attending.